Hi, this is Hannah Lipton, the 2019 winner of the Flute New Music Consortium competition. A little bit about myself. I was born and raised in Croton-on-Hudson, New York, which is a small town about an hour north of New York City. I began studying classical piano as a young child and played throughout my entire life up until this day. I didn't begin composing until I was maybe about 16, 17, and I mostly was just, really entirely, just writing at the piano, not even notating, just making up my own little pieces and then memorizing them and then performing them and recording them. Eventually, I had this little piano suite that I submitted to, undergrad applications. I eventually went to attended Skidmore College, which is a liberal arts school in upstate New York in Saratoga Springs. There I was a music major, but I originally went thinking I might be a dance major because I grew up dancing, doing ballet and modern dance and all, the whole 9 yards. So I did take I took lots of dance classes and English, some philosophy, but eventually I found that music was my calling, and it was the thing that made me the most happy. So I ended up deciding to be a music major. However, Skidmore College, the music department, doesn't actually have a composition department, so I did take a class in composition, but it was sort of you're on your own and you can you're assigned certain little projects, like write a trumpet duet, but you just kind of have to figure it out yourself. So it wasn't really like a formal training like other music schools and conservatories would have, where you're assigned a private teacher and you work with them on a weekly basis. It was kind of just that one class, and then I continued doing independent studies of composition and learned notation software, and then slowly just began writing for larger ensembles, different instrumentations, and it just kind of kept growing on its own. I realized that composing really was my calling. I think when I attended my first music festival, summer music festival, I think in maybe summer of 2014, and then upon graduating, that following fall, I started studying privately with a composer in New York City, and I would take the train in on a weekly basis, and started getting real formal training, which was really exciting. Eventually, I firmly decided that I wanted to pursue a master's degree in composition. I waited a few years after graduating because I guess you could say I had a bit of catch up to do, just not having had any real formal training in my undergrad. But eventually I had enough music to have a portfolio to submit to music programs, and I had a few options after the application process, and eventually I chose to attend the University of Southern California, Thornton School of Music. And I'm now in my second year of my master's degree. And regarding my compositional style, that can be hard to describe just because listeners might say one thing while I have other thoughts about my music, but definitely a few characteristics that are pretty consistent in my music. I'm a pretty melodic composer, you could say. One of my a professor I had at a music festival said to me, "Oh, you're a melodic composer," and I had never really thought about my music that way, but it is true. I tend to have melodically driven music. I would say, in addition to that, I am not the most conceptual composer. I think right now in the new music world, and it's been this way for a while, a lot of composers will have these really incredible and meaningful, sometimes very personal concepts and stories behind their music that they try to convey. You know, maybe it's sometimes it's like a personal trauma, sometimes it's a critique on something that's happening in our society, and I think that that's so wonderful. However, that's not really the way I work personally with my music. For me, it's all very meaningful to me, and I really try to put a lot of thought behind every single note and every like musical decision I make. But at the end of the day, for me, it's really about just the sounds and hoping, you know, that it'll reach, that the music I create will reach some people. And of course, you know, you can't please everyone, and that's just part of it. But yeah, just for me, it's just kind of creating sounds that I think are beautiful. And I know beauty is subjective, but I think that there's a lot of pain in life and pain in the world, and I think that for me, writing music, it's an escape. At least my style, I think it's sort of like an escape from that. It's like, how can I find the beauty in life and in myself? So those are some points. In terms of like influences, I definitely love, like, you know, the whole, like, a lot of the classical repertoire, standard rep, like Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, moving ahead, you know, 100 years, like Debussy, Ravel, the French Impressionists, Stravinsky, all of that good stuff. In terms of like new music composers, I am a big fan of Aaron J. Kernis, Jennifer Higdon, David Lang, Caroline Shaw. I really like the music that they make. I think it's very driving and also generally pretty melodically driven music, at least a lot of the repertoire that I've heard. A bit more on like artistic inspiration. I tend to, especially when I'm feeling either stuck or discouraged or maybe uninspired, I'll turn to, usually it's like a handful of female artists. The ones I can think of in particular who are non-classical, I love Joanna Newsom, Maggie Rogers, Grimes, a bunch of others. There are these artists that I really, really admire. I love the music that they make, and also what, you know, when I've seen them in interviews, they seem so grounded in their artistic decisions. They have great fashion. They just have, like, I really like the way they approach music and the way they see themselves as musicians. And it excites me, like, when I see especially female musicians, like, that feel so grounded in their work and they're so motivated. It inspires me to keep working on my music too. Does popular music play any sort of role in my compositional style? I would say not consciously, but I grew up on popular music of all subgenres, like classic rock and full-on megastar pop music, folk, rock, all of that, like all non-classical music. So it's definitely seeped into my consciousness, and I'm sure, like, you know, my knowledge of harmony and just like what comes to me naturally, at least some of that is a result of what I've been exposed to. And if people do find that my music evokes maybe little hints of pop music, I think that's great. Is there a correlation between my writing style and professional aesthetic? I would say definitely. It's not always fully conscious, the decisions I make in my aesthetic, whether it be like my fashion sense or my website, any aspects of me and my character that are visible to the world. But yeah, no, I mean, I think like people and artists especially, we're all we're drawn to certain kinds of music, we're drawn to certain kinds of art, different artists, fashion, like there's so many different things in life that we find attractive, and it's unique for everyone. But yeah, like I guess in regards to like my website, you could say it's very, like I had a lot of fun making it. It's very kind of rainbow and pastel, kind of ethereal, not very serious, you could say, lots of colors. And then my music in general does maybe evoke like an ethereal sort of, I don't know, watercolor kind of aesthetic, you could say. So I think, I definitely do love like a visual component as an artist. I think it's interesting with music because you can't really see it, but still there are visual aspects to it, like what you envision when you hear music. And I do sort of try to match, to kind of create like a whole visual audio project in a way. I've joked around with people when they say, what does your music sound like? And I'll often say, it kind of matches my clothing style because I wear lots of colorful clothes and patterns. So yeah, I think that there's definitely a connection, and I think that there always will be. I just think it's a lot of fun to have an aesthetic that feels unique and meaningful to you. The titles of my pieces, they definitely are kind of often playful. You guys mentioned Layla's Moonbeam, Liquid Sky, Galaxy Pond. What's the other one? Oh, Amaranth Garden. That was actually based off of a painting called Amaranth Garden, but still very playful. I think my decisions, titles are so hard. A lot of composers agree that can be like one of the hardest things, and we often don't come up with titles until the very end. At least that's the case for me. I think I generally go for composition titles that are generally not much more than 2 to 3 words, but evoke a certain kind of imagery, something kind of ethereal and colorful, that kind of like, when an audience member is going to be listening to one of my pieces in a concert, they'll see the title and think, oh, okay, this is might be kind of colorful piece, or kind of maybe have a sort of fantastical feel. So I try to have fun with my titles. I have a piece called Scherzo. Sometimes I keep it simple, but it is fun to get creative with titles. I do mention interest in holistic medicine, yoga, and meditation in my composer bios and on my website. I don't know if these influence my work as a composer, maybe lightly so. I think these are just things I try to practice in my life to help manage stress and everyday challenges. I prioritize like being healthy. I think just in general, the better I feel mentally and physically, the easier of a time I'll have composing. I find like if I'm very stressed and I do a meditation and it lifts some of the stress, that the musical ideas might come easier to me. At this point in my compositional career, I'm not entirely sure. I have, I think, at least 3 or 4 compositions that include flute, and that doesn't include a couple orchestra pieces I've written. I really love the flute. I think it's such a beautiful instrument. I think it's a lot of fun to write for. It's such an aerobic instrument. I mean, it's almost like writing for, violin or piano. Like a strong player can really do anything. I mean, of course, you have to take into account the fact that the person playing is a human being and they have to breathe, and you don't want to make things hard for the player. But I do love writing for flute. I think it's a lot of fun, and I think it sounds great on its own and also really great with other instruments. What do I find challenging or engaging about writing for the instrument? Well, like I said, the flute, it's so versatile. I mean, I love writing like fast scales, tuplets, like 16th notes going into 16th note sextuplets, going up and down and arpeggios. Like I love those kinds of motions, and the flute does that kind of stuff so well. And also, like I said, it's beautiful on its own, and it also blends so well with other instruments. I really love combining flute with string instruments. I think the challenges, well, I'm still so early on in my compositional career, so I think there's so much more I could learn about the flute. I've done very little with extended technique, and I know flute players can do a lot of really cool techniques. And also it is important to keep in mind like what's comfortable for the player and knowing that they have to breathe at certain points. Do I ever work collaboratively on compositions with my performers? So far I haven't done as much of that as I'd like. Generally, like so far, a lot of my compositional processes, a lot of my time spent composing, can be very solitary. I mean, I'll work with my teacher and I might ask like players or just instrumentalists, like show them parts of my music and ask them if it's playable. So I definitely would love more of that. I think it could be really interesting and probably really helpful to be in more communication with instrumentalists, especially when I know that they're going to be playing my music. Given that I love the flute so much, I would love to befriend more flute players here at USC. I know a few, but I haven't really gotten close with anyone. But because I love, I really love writing for the instrument, I think it would be really great to have the opportunity to work more closely with someone. Something I could consider is finding a flute player who has a recital coming up in the near future and maybe seeing if they'd want to commission a new work. That could be a really fun thing.